I want to focus now on really making decisions based on the public views, which are based on just false economic ideas. Okay, that's the main thing. And if you start a policy with some economic theory that is wrong, then obviously the policy would not be great. So let's go back. I mentioned that the day before yesterday, the debate about the generosity or the lack of generosity of the public, of the state. And I'm just reminding this because you'll see that in the background of many other wrong theories, there is this same element of is the state generous enough? But I want to talk now about the issue that was debated here just recently, about a year and a half ago, about what should we do with the tax surplus? Remember this, Odfei Misim. So this actually, we could go back even to when Kachlon was the Minister of Finance. This was like 5-6 years ago. And at some point he said, oh, I have Odfei Gviat Misim, tax surplus, and I consulted the senior accountants in Israel what to do with it, which just sounds so stupid. Why do you consult the senior accountants? How is that even related to anything? Let me just clarify, when they had the surplus, what does it mean? And then the public debate was, what shall we do with these piles of money that is sitting in treasury? What shall we do with it? And the true story was that the tax revenue was above planned, but it was still below spending. So there's no surplus, there's still a deficit, just the deficit was smaller than planned. So, okay, should we give this back to the people? No, there's nothing to give back. So just think of a household, for instance, a family that has an income every month, an income of 10,000 shekels, and every month they spend 11,000 shekels. Okay, so they're in debt. And they also have 1 million shekels debt on their house. And then 1 month, instead of making 10,000 shekels, they make 10,500 shekels. Oh, what shall we do with the surplus? You don't have any surplus, but okay. Let's go let's make my life harder. Suppose that in 1 month, okay, remember their spending is 11,000, and then there is a month in which their income was, good surprise, 12,000. So yeah, there is a surplus that month of 1,000 shekels. What shall we do with the surplus? No, you don't have any surplus. You have 1 million shekel debt, okay? But more generally, this comes to the point of consumption smoothing. So suppose you don't have a normal salary like regular every month, you know exactly how much you get, but you own a business and income fluctuates. So what's the right policy? Shall I spend every month according to my income that month? Or do we want to smooth our consumption? I think clearly the latter, right? No debate? No debate. Okay. And the same thing is true about the government. Then recently, if you remember, when still it was the government of Bennett and Lapid, and there was this debate, and they actually did have a small surplus. And there was a debate, what should we do with the surplus? And economists say nothing, don't do anything with the surplus, it's temporary. You cannot just increase spending if you have a temporary surplus. Then if that's how you live, you have to cut spending when you have taxes below the expectations. So it's just stupid. And you remember there was like, I'll give you just a concrete example. This was about the tax on gas, on gasoline for cars. And even not just Netanyahu, Avi Simchon, professor of economics, said, you have a surplus, give it back to people. Reduce the tax on gasoline because the price of gasoline went up. That's just completely stupid, goes against all economic logic. Because people have to pay the tax because there is some rationale behind the tax. You could disagree with the rationale. Tax on the externality of congestion, not the optimal tax, but that's something that captures congestion and pollution. Plus, it's a source of income for the government. And if the world price of gas went up, there's no reason to reduce the tax because then it's really more expensive. Moreover, if you want to give people back surplus, which you shouldn't, but if you do want, why on gasoline? Why not on whatever, subsidized rice, whatever? Doesn't make much sense. But then the issue is that when it comes to governments, it's even worse than households. So households that do not smooth consumption and spend more when they have higher income and therefore need to cut down their spending when they have lower income, that's just some disutility. Doesn't make much sense. But with a government, there is sort of an effect on the economy, because if in good times the government spends more and then in bad times it has to spend less. So even if we are both a bit, Josh and I, skeptical about the Keynesian effect, still when you spend less, if you cut spending, that might have a negative effect on economic output. Debate is how much. It cannot have a positive effect. So that just increases fluctuations. We call it מדיניות pro-מחזורית, pro-cyclical policy. So if the government works in a way that increases the transitions from slowdowns to economic growth. Okay, wrong direction. Okay, then we talked about it briefly the day before yesterday, and I want to emphasize this point again. Any reform damages some people. It's impossible practically to do a Pareto improving reform. No one is harmed. Always someone is harmed. And then there's always, oh, what about the chalashim, the poor? So we are not allowed to do any reform that is bad for a large mass of poor people. So let me take you back to 1990, and I talked about that the day before yesterday. Obviously, a lot of poor people suffered when they opened the economy to free trade. So because why? I did show you the facts was that unemployment didn't really increase over. I mean, it went up for a year or two, but then it went back down. And there was an improvement in jobs because we moved from jobs that were protected from imports, paying minimum wage, to industries that paid higher wages. But of course, you know, someone who was working in a minimum wage textile industry in the periphery, this person is not going to be an engineer the next day. So think of a woman who is 60 years old, and what will she do? Okay, maybe she will be fired and will not find a job. So some people are harmed by this. I mean, in fact, most people did. Ori Katz did a study of that and showed that, yeah, people found different jobs, but maybe it's not as good and not as nice as the one they had before. But if you look at the longer run, what happened to poor people in Israel as a result of this reform is just fantastic. Reduced a lot the cost of living and opened opportunities to work. So in my philosophy, someone that was born in the periphery to parents who are both unskilled minimum wage workers, I think that this person should have the possibility to be an engineer. But according to the system of, no, we shouldn't make any reform, okay, your parents worked in the periphery in the minimum wage, you should do the same thing. And what happened ex post is clearly fantastic. So again, you should think of the long run. More reforms, always someone suffers, someone benefits, but we advance. And it's wrong to block reforms because someone suffers. Okay. A good one. So we know that some people go to the military, some do not. Some go to the military and do a more life-risking duty. Others do not. So a lot of politicians, and this is very popular in the Israeli public, say, okay, we need to compensate these guys. So military veterans, chayalim meshuchrarim, get all these programs of compensation. For instance, subsidizing university tuition, free schooling, and there's a long, long list of things. And is that good for these soldiers? Most people would say yes. I would say no, it's bad for them. Why is it bad for them? Because I'm trying to think like an economist. It costs something. So I'm not comparing it to nothing or that. I'm comparing it to, could you do something better with the money? And the answer is clearly yes. Give them the money, okay? Why is that horrible? Because you encourage people to do something that maybe they don't want to do or is not good for them. Okay, you'd say, oh, going to university is obviously good for everyone, maybe. But now think of two soldiers. One of them comes from a sufficiently strong background, has the ability to go to university, is accepted to university, and benefits from this subsidy. Now, his friend, who did in the military exactly the same, they were both risking their lives together, comes from a poor background, doesn't have the skills, the ability, and cannot be accepted to university. So what are you telling these guys? Oh, because you come from a stronger background, you get a compensation for being in the army. Your friend doesn't. That's just wrong, morally wrong, and inefficient. And then the list is extremely long. I did a chapter with Shira on my podcast, and it took us about half an hour to just read the long list of benefits. But you know, of course, you need to go and ask for everything. So the bureaucracy is horrible. So it's just an extremely inefficient, wasteful, and unjust way to, instead of just giving them money. Then there is, of course, the ma'anak shichrur, the money you get when you're out of the military, but you're not allowed to use it unless it is for some good purpose, right? Pikadon, not shichrur, not ma'anak shichrur. Okay, pikadon. What are you allowed to do with it? You could start a business, use it for schooling, buy a house, get married, spend it on your marriage, but not everything you want. So you need to sort of show, guys, here I'm doing it for one of the causes in the list. Now you could give me the money. And what's the rationale here? Well, some people tell me if you just give the money to these young people, they'll just use it and go travel around the world. That's waste. So no, that's the best use of the money. Why is that the best use of the money? Because what happens really, right, when you get out of the army, say, okay, now I want to travel. That's the tradition in Israel. I want to travel in the world. I don't have money, so now I will waste 1 or 2 years of my life doing some low-skill job, saving money so I could go to Thailand or to Latin America or wherever, right? That's just a waste of time. Take the money, travel, go to university, get your skills. That's just extremely inefficient. I don't want to get into avodah muadefet, which is just extremely corrupt. Let's just skip it now. Okay, let's talk about another fallacy, which is free parking. Okay, so what's the reference? I'm talking about, of course, places in which there is shortage of parking spaces, public parking spaces. I used to live in this street in Tel Aviv. I moved because I was sick of the shortage of parking and other things. And this is a car. I took a picture in my street. I don't know if you could see, you could see the car didn't move for a few weeks. And then I took the same picture again 2 weeks later. The car just doesn't move. And this is an extremely expensive, in what sense expensive piece of real estate, because other people would love to park there. Okay? But generally, when I ask people, do you think it's okay to charge money for parking your car in the public space? It's not your private land. Oh no, near my house, obviously it should be free. Obviously. I say, okay, let's think of two people that more or less the same demographics, the same income, but just randomly, one of them works every day until 4 p.m., one of them works every day until 7 p.m. So if it's this area, for instance, that means that obviously the guy that finishes working at 4 p.m. will park near his house, and the guy or girl that finishes working at 7 p.m. will park 2 miles away from house. Obviously, that's how things should be. And what about someone who doesn't even own a car, but they're an older couple, and they want their grandchildren to come and visit them? They cannot, because there's nowhere to park. That just creates a huge inefficiency. And then in Tel Aviv, they did even a horrible thing, which the regional parking permit, they expanded it during the day to the entire town of Tel Aviv. Okay, so now people could just park anywhere they want. So I said it's horrible. My neighbors said, no, it's fantastic. Now I could drive to work. I don't need to take the bus. And okay, what does free parking do in this case? Okay, so people say, I'm driving. First of all, it gives an incentive to use the car instead of public transportation. Fine. Then people come to the center of town and they say, okay, there is an alternative which is available. I could go into this private parking lot and pay a lot of money, or I could go around in a circle and try to find some free parking. Okay, what does this do? Kill people. It kills people. Why? Because searching for parking significantly increases congestion and pollution kills people. But the right to have free parking, when it's not really free because it's not available, that's more important than lives. Okay. Then people use it as just, public space for just weird stuff. This is in Tel Aviv. Yeah. Why shouldn't I buy this van? Because I'll buy it because I could park it for free. Yeah, I know it's illegal, but they still do it. And someone came to me after a lecture and told me, well, my wife and I, we always just hold one car. And then the point of time came, we decided to buy a new car, sell the old car. We bought a new car. We started trying to sell the old car. We saw that it doesn't get a reasonable price. We said, just leave it. Sometimes it's okay to use a second car. So if I had to pay 50 shekels a month to park it on this extremely expensive real estate, we know how much it is because there's a market for parking. It's more than 1,000 shekels a month. If I had to pay 50 shekels a month, I'll throw this car to the bin. But because it's free, someone else pays a huge cost, I still keep it there. So free parking is just horrible, creates huge distortions, and actually kills people. But based on this fallacy, it's extremely popular to have free parking. You think the mayor of Tel Aviv, Ron Huldai, doesn't understand this? He understands it perfectly well. How do I know? Because I talked with him. And I know it, for sure. And people around him understand it very well. But they also understand that the public, the voters, love the idea of free parking, even though they suffer from it. All right. We talked about that. Meches or michsa. I'll skip that. And let's talk about rent control. Okay. I think that's a fantastic example to show how the public is misled and how horrible ideas come to life and how it's horrible the outcomes are. So luckily for us, I think I should give the credit to Ayelet Shaked. I mean, I'm not a great fan of Shaked for many reasons. I think she did a lot of populist things. Talking about economics, I mean, not put aside my differences with her on other issues. But at the time, Stav Shafir was promoting the idea of rent controls. Eventually, she and Roy Folkman advanced something that didn't include rent control. They call it מהפכה בשכירות, בשורה ל2 מיליון שוכרי דירות, and some other verbal nonsense, but they did nothing practically. And they came, Ayelet Shaked was the minister of משרד המשפטים, Justice, and she just blocked it. And she consulted me before she did it, and I gave her zero ideology. I told her, look, it's just bad. It's not because of, we should, I have an ideology of respecting property rights, etc. I just say, look, every place they tried rent control, it didn't end well. It ended bad. And that's why she blocked it. But of course, the newspapers in Israel criticized her because, she's an extreme capitalist, she's against the poor, she's in favor of the rich, it's just this neoliberal ideology, etc. But no, I don't know why she blocked it, but I do know that she did talk to me, and I know what I told her. And I think she did us a big favor. Okay, so if the fundamental thing about rent control is something we talked about the day before yesterday. Prices in a market economy have an important role. Demand, supply. Without a price mechanism, demand cannot meet supply, and supply cannot meet demand. So if you have a price that is too low, below market prices, and that's the idea of rent control, then obviously you have more demand than supply, obviously. But people who still promote it, so they have some other ideas about the price mechanism. Why is it that flats in some areas are more expensive to rent and less expensive in other areas? So there is a theory, midat ha'chazirut. I don't know how to translate it to English. How mean people are, you know, how greediness. It's all about greediness. It's just a coincidence that people in the center, in the high demand area, are just more greedy than people in the periphery. That's all. Here you see, you think, chazirim nimastem, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so what do we know from research about, it's economic theory and data. What happens when you have rent control? First thing, shortage. Why? Because you set a price that is below the market equilibrium. So there's more demand, less supply. You tell me, what do you mean more demand? People, or they need a flat or they don't need a flat. Why is that wrong? Because the demand for housing services is not inelastic. And I respond to prices. And if I live in a cheap area, I will rent a larger house. In an expensive area, a smaller, or more students that share a house in Tel Aviv, more students in the same size flat than in Ben Gurion. Same household, so people respond to prices. It's not a fixed demand, yes or no. And when the rent is down artificially, people who already have a place, they hold it. And then they never leave, because once they leave, they lose the benefit, or they sell it in the black market. Of course, poor maintenance. Why is that? Because, okay, once there's rent control, if you have a flat on the market, immediately 1,000 people would want to rent it. So why should I spend anything on maintenance? Black market, because then, okay, I want a flat and I don't have. I'll come to the owner, I'll say, okay, you know, officially I'll pay you whatever, 2,000 shekels a month, but let me buy from you this piece of junk for 10,000 shekels, and that's part of the story. And then, you know, I went into this because I had a debate with Stav Shafir, and she basically said, no, you're lying. The OECD economists recommend rent control. Honestly, that's what she said. Public, you're lying. So I actually went and did something she obviously didn't do. I went and read what the OECD economists write in their reports. But anyway, let's see. The big picture is that rent control destroys the rental market. And the rental market is extremely important. This vision that everyone should own their house is just wrong. Some people cannot afford a flat or a house, and some people would like to move from place to place because of labor mobility, and they need the ability to rent. So actually, we would love to have a big rental market. That's great for everyone. So actually, what did I find in the OECD reports? With more rent control, there is more leaking roofs. So just exactly as the theory predicts, with rent control, owners do not maintain the flats. With more rent control, there is more shortage, of course. More rent control, people have to, you know, I'll get to Matan Chodorov later, but he did this big piece on how rent control in Holland is fantastic. Of course, if you interview only people that benefit from it, those who are in the controlled flats, and not people who wait 19 years in queue to get the flat, then you get the picture that it is fantastic. What about the effect of rent control on prices on average? Surprisingly, it doesn't even reduce the average price. How could that be? I mean, everything I described to you now is based on the fact that prices artificially go down. Well, here's what happens. it starts at some point, a wrong populist decision, uninformed decision. Within a short period of time, everyone realizes it's a disaster. But now you have already tenants that have this zchut, the right, grandfathering. You know, you cannot, okay, now if you cancel it, these people would be damaged. So it's hard to do. So what do? They say, okay, we'll restrict it to the existing flats, and everything new rents would not be covered. But what happens? The excess demand goes to the places that are not regulated, and prices go up. There's no magic here. So it's just, you could see it in many places in the US, like two distributions of prices. Manhattan is a great example. A lot of people have large flats in Manhattan, pay very low rents, but then the other people who want to rent a flat go to Manhattan, try to rent a flat, and you'll have to pay a lot of money. Yeah, that's the Manhattan story. It's unbelievable what's going on there. Yeah.
I saw Sweden on the right-hand side. Can you explain what happened?
Yeah, Sweden is just another example of a disaster. Yeah, because they have rent control. Yeah, but look, no one is perfect, right? I just said that Sweden is very different than what Shelley Yachimowicz tells you about Sweden, but they do have rent control. And in fact, there was just a few years back, some minister there got into trouble because she tried to cheat the system and pay a bribe to get into a rent control flat.
How do you explain Germany?
Wait, Germany, next slide. So that's Sweden, Berlin, yeah, here it is. So the facts are that there's a lot of stories about Germany, as if there is effective rent control that works. It's just stories, it's not true. What do they have there? They had a system that tries to eliminate landlords from taking from tenants more than the market price, because that's sometimes the problem. I'm not sure that the benefit of this regulation is more than the damage, but it's not rent control. So they didn't try to reduce the rent on most flats. Then 2 years ago, I think, or 3 years ago, the Greens and the Socialists took over in Berlin, and then they announced, now we will do real rent control that would reduce prices. The same day I wrote a post, here is my prediction. Within a year from today, we will see all the damages. It took less than a year. Then I think the Supreme Court canceled it or something like that. But the minute they impose strict rent controls, all the damage we expect will happened and happened very fast. And then, you know, the tragedy is, and you see prices just go up. When there is more demand, prices go up. The tragedy is that we don't even need to go overseas to learn about the damage of rent control. So in Israel, 1954, so even before the establishment of the State of Israel, the British Mandate, they had some rules that protected tenants to some extent. But then in the 50s, there was inflation and a lot of immigrants coming to Israel. So rents started going up very fast. And then the government, as you already know from the taxi story, didn't understand much economics. This was even earlier, so they didn't learn much. And they said, okay, then we definitely need to impose rent control. But then their concern was that with rent control, what will happen is that landlords would just, at the end of a year or 2 years when the contract ends, they will just tell their tenants to leave and sign a new contract or just leave it empty. So what they did was amazing. Rent control stated that the price in lirot is fixed. That's it. You're not allowed to raise it. So with high inflation, it was eroded very fast. And in addition, you cannot end a contract. So people who gave their house, let their house for a year or 2 years, maybe because they even left the country to do something for a year or two, they came back, that's it. Their house is gone. Tenants are there. Yeah. Wait, the Dmei Mafteach came later. So, and this before the Hamapach, 1977, when the first time the Labour Party lost power and the Likud came to power, before the elections, they promised that they will cancel this law. So that was 77. How many years did it take them to cancel the law? Trick question. Was not canceled. Never canceled. Still there. It's impossible to cancel these horrible laws. Almost impossible. And indeed what happened was, so now people are tenants in a flat. They basically have a flat they could use for practically free, but they want to move. What do? There was a black market. They sold the right to live in, to be a protected tenant to someone else, and sometimes gave some money to the landlord, so the landlord sort of also agrees to that. And then it became a legal arrangement, and that's dmei maftech. So what is it to buy a flat with dmei maftech? It is you are buying the right to be a protected tenant, and the law says that 1/3 of the price goes to the landlord. So we're still stuck with this horrible thing. Huge damage, nothing good, but still, Stav Shafir, Roy Folkman, and then I'm just mentioning these two names, but when they were pushing this, half of the Knesset members were in favor. So people are just lazy and populist, something that is a complete failure everywhere it was tried, including in Israel, huge damages, and they still promote it. Well, because the tenants that are there. So you see, the point is, it's very hard to cancel damaging laws. Very hard, in many cases. So this guy, Assar Lindbach, is a Swedish socialist, says only an airstrike is more efficient than rent control to demolish a city. Now, okay. Paul Krugman is an economist, a famous one, has the Nobel Prize in economics, but he's sort of the left. The socialists love him. What he says on rent control. Of course, it's a horrible idea. It just doesn't work. So to say, no, I'm a socialist and therefore I'm in favor of rent control is to say, I'm a socialist and therefore I'm in favor of damaging things that are bad for the poor. Because some research shows that as a result of rent control, money goes from the poor to the rich. And then, so why is the Israeli public so ignorant about all of that? Let's see what when Stav Shafir and Folkman were promoting this, what did the newspapers in Israel? Economic newspaper, כלכליסט, הפיקוח שיכול לסדר את שוכרי הדירות, blah, blah, blah. The entire article just cites what the promoters of the horrible law say, and they didn't bother to do something you could do. Try this. Google 10 minutes, the effect of rent control, and you'll immediately discover that, well, maybe there's some damages, okay? Maybe. But journalists in economic newspapers didn't even bother to do that. Globes, same thing. The Marker were a bit more hesitant at that point, but again, most of it, yeah, great idea. Too bad that this neoliberal Shaked is blocking it. Oh, that's just unbelievable. Sarat HaMishpatim Tzipi Livni added, the law says that a flat has to be of these and that qualities and no less than 26 square meters. Why? Because we want the tenants to have a great flat. So you could imagine how horrible that is. Why? Could you imagine any scenario in which you restrict the size of a flat, that this somehow improves the life of tenants? By taking flats out of the market, what is the effect? It will only raise prices. Plus, suppose I'm not a very rich guy and I choose to live in a 20 square meter flat. And I'm not saying it's great, but if my alternative is to live in a 26 meter flat, to pay more and not to have money for food, maybe I prefer 20 meters. Or if my alternative is to share a flat with someone, maybe I prefer my privacy. They're just really restricting the options for people and damaging them. Okay, moving on. How do you reduce the price of flats? One very popular, so now not renting, buying. A very popular idea is that when you want to reduce the price of something, you reduce the demand. Okay, so yeah, that could work in some cases. For instance, suppose you want to reduce the price of cucumbers. Okay, set a law that every person in Israel is restricted to buy only 1 kilo of cucumbers a month. Would that reduce the price of cucumbers? Suppose you could enforce it. Well, at least in the short run it will, because over time the supply would respond, but yeah, that could work. The thing is that based on this idea, and here it's a mistake of, typically I'm with the treasury economists, but sometimes I have some debates with them and I need to remind them, it's true that you studied with me Introduction to Economics. But then when you graduated and you were fantastic students, you graduated your bachelor degree, you went to treasury. You didn't bother to come to the advanced master degree courses. So you still have something to learn. And that's one fantastic mistake they did by thinking that when you take out people who buy houses in order to rent them out, that you somehow reduce the prices of housing in the market. It doesn't work, and that's just the standard economic theory, macro theory of housing. Why is that? Because there is a confusion here between the demand for cucumbers, eating cucumbers, and the demand for a machine that, think of the following, let's go to a different example. Suppose there is, to produce bread, you need a machine, okay? Something, some oven, something, a machine to produce bread. And most people would like to have their own private machine to produce their own bread. So now, but some people have a large machine and they produce bread and sell it to others, okay? You see the parallel, okay? Renting out flats. And most people who own their flat, it's like they bake their own bread. They own a flat and the flat gives them the services, the housing services. You could own a flat and sell the housing services to someone else, let your flat and someone else rents it, okay? That's the parallel. Now, suppose there is a shortage of bread. In what sense? Bread is too expensive. What would be the right policy? Well, you'd say obviously to increase supply, but then if to increase supply is very hard, I should reduce demand. Demand of what? Bread or machines to bake bread? If I want to reduce the price of bread, should I restrict demand to bread? Say every household is allowed to buy only 5 loaves of bread a month? Or should I restrict the demand for baking machines? Which of the two? Bread, of course. On the contrary, I want more. I want people to buy machines so they could bake more bread. And don't think of the supply of machines as fixed. If there is a fixed amount of machines, then who cares who owns them? The amount of bread produced, just assume that the machines produce full capacity. Okay, we don't have empty flats. The machines produce full capacity. So it doesn't matter who owns the machine, but if there's more demand for machines, there will be a supply response. New machines would be produced. So clearly, if you want to reduce the price of bread, you want to do it through demand, reduce the demand for bread. You want to do it through supply, increase the demand for breads, for machines that produce bread. You want more people to invest in machines. That's how you cut a shortage, right? I'll tell you, look, there's not enough public transportation in Israel. We need more buses or less buses? More, right? Obviously more, okay? So we need more people that own flats and rent the flats out. So tell me something. If you restrict these people who buy flats in order to rent them out, okay, what will happen to rent? Goes up, right? Okay, so here's the trade-off. Treasury people think. General public people think. Okay, if we push these investors, we push these investors outside of the market, It's true that it is bad for renters because there's less of a supply of housing for rent, but then at least it's good for people who could buy the houses. It would reduce the prices of houses. But wait, if rent goes up, what happens to the value of the asset that has a higher return? Goes up. So it cannot work, and it doesn't work. But still, they are pushing that all the time. I had a meeting with Lieberman when he was the Minister of Treasury just recently. And I told him, look, that's just wrong, don't do it. And he said, yeah, of course you're right. But I'm still doing it. I said, why are you doing it? I'll just, letzanen et hashuk. No, it doesn't work, don't do it. It doesn't work. Yeah.
Can you assume that rich people will buy a second apartment anyway, so the state should earn their taxes from that?
Look, don't confuse. It's a good point because a lot of people make the same, I'd say, mistake. Confusing between taxes, state revenue, justice, and the problem we want to solve. That's where we started the discussion. How to make housing affordable to people, okay? The more you tax people on housing, the more expensive housing will be. There's no magic here, okay? So I'm not saying I'm against or in favor. I'm in favor of taxation. I want the government to have revenue. But that would imply that rents would be more expensive.
Is it even within the government's interest to lower the prices of the houses themselves, considering that the majority of people actually own houses, so it would be lowering the asset price?
Look, if you own a house, it's still, why do you care if the price goes down? No, I think that's, a lot of people make this claim. They don't really want to reduce prices. I don't buy it. It's a conspiracy theory. It's wrong. They really want to reduce the prices. And look, I own a house, okay? I'm still happy for prices to go down. Why? Because I love my children. I want them to be able to buy a house, okay? So it just doesn't make sense, this argument. Okay, so I think we attacked that problem. Just a completely wrong policy, extremely popular. Again, every time, again and again, you see it. Mas dira shlishit is back on the table now. Unbelievable. Only to increase supply. No, if you want to fight prices through demand, okay, reduce demand, but the right demand, the demand for housing services, not for the asset. Here, I'll give you an example. Think of two guys, okay, or two girls, doesn't matter, who both made, they had the business, a startup, they sold it, they made a lot of money. Each of the two buy 200 square meters real estate, okay? One of them, that's just his house. I'm a wealthy guy, I want to live in a flat that is 200 square meters. Do we have any problem with that? It's okay, fine. The other guy took the 200 square meters and split it to 4 flats. He lives in one and rents the 3 others to whoever wants in market price. Is this guy, what's about this guy? Oh, he's this evil guy who is rich and collects flats and takes advantage of the poor. Who is better for the market? The second guy.
But what about the opposite scenario where you take a 200-meter apartment and then you buy another 200 meters and merge it into one to make it your own?
Exactly. Perfect. You see, that's the point. You want to reduce demand. I'm not saying I'm in favor or against. You want to reduce demand, reduce the demand for housing services. Tell people you're not allowed to live in more than 100 square meters. Tax people for living in. I'm not saying I'm in favor. I'm just saying if you want to fight the price of housing through reducing demand, reduce the right demand. The demand for bread, not the demand for machines that produce bread. Okay? You want to reduce congestion in public transportation in Israel, restrict people, raise the price of public transportation. Don't tell me that the way to reduce congestion in public transportation is by reducing the number of buses and trains. That's the logic. That's the logic. Okay, let's move on. And yeah, you look at what the Israeli newspapers do. Safsarut HaKarka. So, okay, here that's related to that, but that's a bit of a different claim. Here's the claim. Let's look at the price of a house and decompose it to the cost of building and the cost of land. What do we discover? That in the center of Israel, most of the cost is land, not construction. So if we reduce the price of land, the price of houses would go down. And who owns most of the land? The state of Israel. So the state of Israel, safsarut, I don't know how to say it, it's like a bad word for making money by selling public assets for the market price. How horrible. No, that's what they should do, by the way, because these are public assets. Don't give it randomly to people. Sell it for market price and enjoy the revenue. Reduce taxes, give us more services. That's the right thing to do. But then there's an economic, put that aside, there's an economic argument that if the state reduces the price of land that it sells for the kablanim, for the companies that build houses, contractors, this would obviously reduce the price of housing. Completely wrong. Completely wrong. Basic economics. You only need to graduate Introduction to Microeconomics to understand this. Because for a given amount of land, there will be a given supply, right? There's rules. On each unit of land, you could build that amount of housing. There is supply. Then there is demand. The demand is obviously not affected by the price of land, the demand. So the price equilibrium is unaffected by the price of the land. The reason land is a large part of housing, it's not because the price is high because the land is expensive. Land is expensive because the price is high. You see, the causality goes in the opposite direction. Basic economics. But then there is this funny, so that's just an example. נעמה לזימי. You see, לפני שבועיים הגשתי סדרת חוקים לטיפול בנושא הדיור. חוקים שמהווים שינוי תפיסה ולא פלסטרים חסרי משמעות, בלה בלה בלה. What does she offer? פיקוח על שוק השכירות. Again, so rent control, we know it's horrible, but that's what she's pushing. And מיסוי משקיעי נדל"ן, again, we know it's wrong. But that's what she's pushing. And if I go on, here is Matan Khodorov. And this is based on, where is it? So there was this Machon Yesodot. No, I had it on the slide here. Machon Yesodot. Never mind. It was this bullshit think tank that promoted these horrible ideas. And then you could see, Sever Flotzker. Here it is. Yes. בחסות המדינה, you see, just Sever Plotzker, a very senior economic reporter in ידיעות אחרונות, almost zero understanding in economics, and you see the nonsense he writes here. Based on מכון מחקר של מכון יסודות. מכון יסודות is an extremely biased think tank financed by the lobby of the landholders in Israel, קיבוצים and מושבים, and their interest is to make land more expensive, okay? So let's not go into all the details, but you'd see, and then Matan Khodorov repeats this, so the entire Israeli public is exposed to this complete nonsense. Okay, let's talk about congestion charges. So what's congestion charges? Agrot Godesh. I think generally speaking, economists think it's a great idea. People should pay for what they use, especially if there is congestion. Too many people use the car, and as a result, it's an extremely inefficient. We waste a lot of time on the road, and we create a lot of pollution, so that's just bad. And it's an inefficient allocation of resources. There's a lot of claims against it in the public debate. All of them are wrong. Actually, the right claims against congestion charges are always absent from the debate, which is issues with implementation. So it's a great idea. Theoretically speaking, it's fantastic. To implement it is challenging. I'm not saying impossible. In a few places it was implemented and it works very nice. like in Stockholm, in Singapore, a little bit in London. So it works. It improves welfare, reduces pollution, but the implementation is not easy. I'll just give you as a funny story. So my friend and colleague, Professor Adi Posner, was sitting with a group of students and they had to do their seminarion or whatever. So they wrote about congestion charges. And they based what they wrote on something I wrote. And Adi, my friend, the professor, he never read what I wrote because why should he? And they tell him, the students say, blah, 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 and then they repeat this. אגרות גודש ללא חלופה הן רק נטל נוסף על הציבור. Congestion charges without a good alternative of public transportation, just an extra, just a burden on the public, just more taxes. Doesn't help. And Adi, without ever reading what I wrote, says, where did you find this? Say, in Omer's paper. Say, no, it cannot be that Omer wrote something like that. Say, yeah, I'm sure, we're sure, let's go back and check. Well, they're right, I did write it. But what was the title? Wrong claims. Under the title Wrong Claims, I say this, and that's a good example of wrong. You could already tell me something. Why is it wrong? Two main reasons. Two main reasons. Why? Suppose there's no alternative in terms of public transportation is horrible. So maybe, yeah, okay. When people find driving the car more expensive, they might put political pressure to build public transportation. What else? A more efficient allocation, correct. I'll show you exactly why this is right. But I'll go to the, yeah. So it's a similar mistake people have, like in housing. What do you mean? I rent a flat because I need a flat. I will not rent two flats if it's cheaper. No, you rent a larger flat. The demand for transportation is not inelastic. People respond to prices, to money prices and to time prices. People make a decision. In fact, they did this experiment in Israel, Naim LeYarok. 50% of people who were incentivized not to use their car when the road is congested changed their behavior significantly. What could people do? What do people do? Well, A, they could move to public transportation. B, they could drive in a different hour of the day. C, they could walk or take their bicycle. D, they could carpool with someone. Where am I? E, they could stay at home once in a while and work from home. People make decisions on a daily basis. So it's true that some people have to go, because if I had to be here to give this lecture this morning, I didn't have a good option. I cannot just stay at home, or I cannot just go hitchhiking or take the bus. Right, but some of the times I go into the car, I say, oh, maybe I don't really need to do it. There is an alternative. And people object congestion charges because they think this is like a fine, a penalty for doing something evil. No, it's just a price. It's like when I buy rice, I pay the price of rice. I don't think that someone is punishing me. I don't have an alternative. I cannot eat anything but rice. Yeah, it's fine. Then eat rice, but pay the price for it. Nothing wrong about that. So that's just wrong. But plus, I started the lecture today, and you see that this is related to the generous government fallacy. So suppose it's just another tax. So what? So what? So people pay a tax. Why is it bad to pay a tax based on using your car on a congested road, and it's good to pay a tax on consuming rice or on your labor income? Why? Ma?
Someone is forcing you to not have an alternative and pay. So if you have an alternative, you would use the bus, but you don't have it.
No, but I also don't have an alternative. I want to live. I need an income, so I work. So I have to pay taxes on my labor income. That's fine? Yeah, I want to buy goods. I have to pay VAT tax on it. Is that fine? Why is that okay? Habits. Okay, so let me tell you a story about habit.
Yeah, I want to say that the price is defined by the market, but this price is defined by the government. So how do you choose the right price?
So, okay, implementation is challenging, but suppose we could have an elastic system that actually raises and reduces the prices based on demand. Example, הנתיב המהיר בכניסה לתל אביב. Fantastic. The price, the fast lane entering Tel Aviv, free for public transportation. They sell the excess capacity to private cars. What's the price? It goes up and down according to demand. No problem at all. I'm not saying it's as easy with rice, but it works. No problem at all. A real issue, I didn't mention it so far, but I think habit is extremely strong. Economists, typically in our theories, we tend to ignore that. We say, okay, what's the optimal solution? No, but people think that paying high tax on my labor income, yeah, that's fine. Why? Oh, I'm used to it. But paying for parking, no, that's horrible. Why is that horrible? Because I'm used to it. That's it. I'm used to the fact that it's free. I'll tell you a story. So before I even studied economics, I was a kibbutz member. And at some stage, I was 28 years old, and I finished 4 years of managing the date plantation in kibbutz Kalya. Of course, I wasn't the manager. I was merakez. I don't know how to say it in English, because manager is a capitalist word. So, and then I was nominated to be the manager of the kibbutz. Of course, not manager, mazkir, secretary, because again, we choose our words very carefully. And this was before I even started studying economics. But what was part of the kibbutz system? At the time, this was a real kibbutz, you know, equality, blah, 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 free stuff. And of course, this created a lot of waste because people received. So on the one hand side, we were extremely poor. We didn't have money, very little money. So like if I went to town and I wanted to drink a coffee, I would think, you know, that's very expensive. And if I wanted to buy a book or to go to the theater, that's really expensive. But then if I wanted to, you know, at the time I had hair, to, you know, shampoo my hair, I could do it very generously because that was the free stuff we got. If I wanted to smoke, I could smoke 3 packs of cigarettes a day because that was free, and so on and so forth. I wanted to have dogs, yeah, by all means, have 3 huge dogs, we will feed them. So there's a lot of free stuff. And this created a lot of waste. What did I do? I took a list of all the free stuff people got. I did the calculation, what's the cost per kibbutz member every month. I took out the eating in the dining room because that has this positive externality of meeting each other. And I thought this we should keep. But I thought that, you know, encouraging people to smoke and to have big dogs that intimidate others, maybe that's not such a great idea. So it's not just waste, it also just has a negative externality. And I told the kibbutz members, here, look, that's the amount, 291 shekels a month in 88. So that was quite a lot of money at the time. And here's what I suggest. You get the money and you buy whatever you want. And do you think people love the idea? No, why not? They like free stuff. So it wasn't no one ever said, no, it's against our ideology. It's not ideological problem at all. Because, you know, it's still equality and you could buy whatever you want. And of course, it also eliminated some funny stories. For instance, you know, in the kibbutz system, you don't want anything. I mentioned it the day before yesterday. Remember the blueberries, right? It's needs. It's all about needs. So what do you do if someone has a need to be an artist? You don't have money to be an artist. There was a committee, ועדת חברים it was called, the committee. And if you needed money for your hobbies, you'd have to come to the committee and convince the committee members that this is not something you want, it's something you need, okay? So how do you convince that you need something? Yeah, I mean, the popular people got it, the less popular didn't. So I also suggested we eliminate this, so that would be part of your budget, and if you have a hobby, just do it, and if your hobby makes money, that's great, then that would be your job. So people hated the idea, and then I realized that I cannot get a majority to make this reform. So I went to the general meeting, And I said, okay, the vote is on taking this for half a year as an experiment. And in half a year, if we don't like it, we go back. Nothing irreversible here. And it was pure random luck. The vote was one person more in favor against. That was just a 1% difference. So, okay, we made the decision. Half a year later, how many people voted against going back, in favor of going back to the old system? 0 exactly, 0, including the family that both mommy and daddy had a lot of hair, 2 big dogs, smoking a lot. So the heavy consumers of the free stuff were happy with the new system. Why? Because there's so much less waste and so much more freedom. Freedom to do what you want with your money. And you're not forced to use a lot of hair shampoo and you cannot buy a coffee in a coffee shop. And you see how people find it very hard to accept changes. And exactly the same is with free parking, congestion charges, and so on. And so let's see. That's an interesting figure. It shows you here what you have. That's data from Ayalon, Tel Aviv. And on the horizontal axis is the number of cars per minute. And on the vertical axis, the speed, kilometers an hour. And so you see, of course, there's a negative relationship. More cars, slower traffic. But what happens the minute there's excess congestion, actually less cars and lower speed. That's when the cars basically stand. Okay? So it would be wrong to jump from here to the conclusion that if I introduce congestion charges, I will have more cars and faster moving traffic, but just illustrate the extreme inefficiency. There is a fantastic 8-minute TED lecture by this guy. If you look at it through my YouTube channel, I think you'll have with Hebrew translate. Of course, you all understand English, but with his very strong Swedish accent, it's a bit challenging. So they introduced congestion charges in Stockholm. This is morning, but it's January, so it's dark. Stockholm in the morning. The day before, the day after. Immediately eliminated traffic jams. Immediately. What did they do? They just charge like €2 to enter the center of Stockholm. You could see that picture. What happened? So they, as I did in the kibbutz many years before they did it, in 2006 they agreed to do it for a period of time, a limited period of time, to see how it works. So you see the number of cars drops. This is the population. Population continued to increase, but the number of cars drops because of the congestion charge. Then they remove it. You see, it doesn't go back all the way, because some people learned that they actually have a good alternative, and then they imposed it again forever. Okay, and the number of cars stayed constrained while population was growing. Okay, what about satisfaction? So you see, before they implemented it, they asked people, how happy are you with the idea of congestion charges? Those who live inside town and will not pay were very happy with the idea. And those who are supposed to pay were unhappy with the idea. And then as the people were talking about it more and more, the satisfaction or the objection increased, and people were less and less in favor of it. And then they implemented it. What happened? Wow, people were happy about it. Okay, so exactly the story I had with the kibbutz. People are afraid of change. But once the change is implemented, and it's good, it works, then they're actually happy about it. Even those who paid the price went up from 15% support, these are car owners that pay often, went from 15% support in theory, in practice, 55% support. People who use it and pay it. Why? Why are they happy to pay? Because the road is free, they could move, they're not stuck in traffic. You don't need to charge a lot of money from people to force them, to push them to make a different decision. And you know, again, that's freedom. That's freedom. It's not constraining. It's freedom. You do whatever you want. but you pay for your decisions. And that's very different than all these laws that say, no, here we completely ban private cars. That's just very extreme. I'm not against banning private cars in some places, but that's just very extreme. Here you just basically say, do whatever you want, but pay the real price for your own decisions. I'll show you a funny story, okay? Here is a village, a river, and the industry they work in. Okay, so people every morning have to go to 24 hours a day. They need to pass to go to the other side of the river to work and then go back. The bridge is quite far. So there is a shuttle that takes them, and the shuttle takes an hour. So every moment, every time they go to work, they waste an hour. They come back home, they waste an hour. Okay, that's not great, but that's how life is. So then at some stage, they build the bridge. The bridge, you could just walk in an instant, nothing, no time at all. You walk to the other side. But they built a very narrow bridge. The capacity of the bridge is not sufficient for everyone in town. Okay, it's just not sufficient physically. What will happen? Okay, someone said, maybe we charge money. So, no, it was built with public funds. It would be free. So who would pass? Well, it would just be a queue. First come, first serve. What would be the length of the queue? How much time would people? 1 hour, right? 1 hour. That's the equilibrium. Why is that? Because it cannot be less than an hour, because why would someone use the shuttle if they could spend less than an hour? And will not be more than an hour, because then I have a better alternative. So the only equilibrium is that to pass the bridge is 1 hour. Okay, so now we're in this equilibrium. The people spend money to build the bridge. Who benefits from it? No one. No one. There's a 1 hour waiting line. They work 24 hours a day, so it's like rotation, okay? So no one gains from it. So just a pure waste of resources. Now let's make the story more interesting. Suppose they charge, say, 10 or 20 shekels to pass the bridge. What will happen in this case to the length of the queue? Okay, you need to pay 10 shekels. What will happen to the length of the queue? Will be shorter, of course, right? Less people will stand in queue. So suppose now you have an alternative. Shuttle for free, 1 hour, stand in the queue for 20 minutes and pay 10 shekels. Let's make it more interesting. Who do you pay the 10 shekels to? You throw it to the river. Okay, you throw it to the river. It's pure waste. You throw the money to the river. Is it better than the previous allocation? Yeah, because some people chose to pay 10 shekels and to save time. No one forced them to do that. So that's, you see, throwing money to the river is better than having it free. Of course, if instead of throwing the money to the river, we collect it and build another bridge, win-win. Okay. אגרה משפרת רווחה. מה? אם לא היה? Then that's a different story. No, but look. Look, no, it's a different story. I showed you, generally speaking, that congestion charges work. I gave you the example from Stockholm. I could talk about Singapore, I could talk about London. It works. I wanted to give you a cute, funny, but I think it's a good example. It shows that even in this extreme case, you just throw money, but it improves allocation, it's better. I don't want to claim that this is the exact description, but bear with me, I'll show you another story, okay? Here's another story. Now there's no bridge. People live in this side, but they could go to the other side to work, to have fun, to whatever, okay? There is a ferry that goes 1 time a day. 7 a.m. every morning, the ferry goes from one side to the other side, from the places people live to the places they could work and have fun and get services, do their shopping, and come back, okay? Now, if the shuttle leaves exactly at 7 and it's completely free and there is no waiting time, the demand is 130 people. 130 people would like to use the shuttle in the morning for free without waiting in line. But there's only 100 places on the ferry, okay? Only 100 places. So what could you do? Well, we'll say just first come, first serve, right? So there'll be a queue. So 130 people who want to go to the other side, everyone is willing to wait a different time. When maybe for one of them, you know, it's crucial. I have to go. Even if I need to wait for 3 hours, I'll come at 7, the shuttle. I'll show up at 4 a.m. and wait until my turn is. And then maybe someone is only willing to wait 5 minutes, and of course the last one, the 130 person is willing to wait only 0 minutes. Okay, what will be the equilibrium? How much time would people wait? When do I have the equilibrium? What will it be? When would people show up to go on the ferry? What time? What will determine it? Mathematician, you have to answer. That's a very simple math question. Exactly, it's the 101 actually, correct. So suppose we rank all people from the one that is willing to wait the most, 3 hours, all the way to the last one, the 130 person that is willing to wait 0. Now let's look at the person, the 100th person, okay? Suppose this person at the 100 point is willing to wait 15 minutes, okay? Not more, but is willing to wait 15 minutes. So that would determine the waiting time. Actually, the person, the 101. That's small details, doesn't matter. Okay, suppose it's 15 minutes. So now what we have is an equilibrium. Everyone shows up at 6:45, waits for 15 minutes, and then pass the river. Okay? There cannot be a different equilibrium. Because if it was 10 minutes, then more than 100 people would show up. That's the only equilibrium. Okay, alternatively, charge money. How much to charge? Again, let's look at the willingness to pay money. Again, we could rank people from the one willing to pay the most to the one willing to pay the least. What would be the equilibrium price to clear the market? The amount of money that the person in the 101 position is willing to pay. Okay? So now it's a price, say 10 shekels, okay? So we have two systems. Both achieve the same thing. It's a way to move the full capacity, but it's not the same people. So let's start with which system is better, money or time?
Money.
Okay, what's the obvious thing that makes money better? The obvious thing, let's start with that.
You can trade.
Waiting is a pure waste. No one gains from it. Paying money, no waste at all. I pay, someone takes the money, right? Someone takes the money and could use it to do other things. There's no waste here. Of course, as economists, we realize money is just a piece of paper. There's no waste by paying money. Okay, just a way to regulate demand. But again, think of suppose the town owns this shuttle, and then they make the money, they could use it to invest and buy a new shuttle. But if people just wait in line, that's a pure waste of resources. So that's the first thing that makes money a better use. So again, congestion charges on the road. What determines today who goes to the road or not is congestion, waste, plus pollution, instead of money. Another rationale, this will be more debatable among some people. Those who are willing to pay more, that's worth for them more, okay? So you get actually a more efficient look. It would be if you need to choose which 100 people should go, it would be the 100 people that are willing to pay and not the 100 people that are willing to wait, okay? I'll not go into the details of that. Another way of thinking of that. So you see, basically I come here and I tell people that say, it's horrible. Roads are congested. What shall we do? Improve public transportation. That would solve the problem. By the way, no. The answer is no. As much as you improve public transportation, congestion will stay unless you charge congestion charges. That's just the equilibrium. Okay, there's no magic here. Why is that? Because always faster, always, almost always, especially in centers, not between two distant towns, but to enter a center of Israel or, you know, central areas, it's always faster and easier to use your own car if the road is empty, if there's no congestion, always. And therefore, if you improve the alternative, suppose by contradiction that the roads become empty, people go back to the road. So that never, it's fantastic to have more alternative. It's great to have great public transportation. But part of an efficient transportation system is private cars. That's part of the system. It's very important to allow people that are willing to pay to use the car. Think of a plumber that needs to go to a house with all the equipment. Okay, now you cannot tell this person to use the bus. And I'll say something more extreme, just to make it more maybe annoying. Suppose someone makes the value of the output of this person is 1,000 shekels an hour. Okay, I want this guy to use the car and get fast from place to place. Why? Because that's more efficient. Plus, if the person pays 50% tax, great for me. Great for the poor people who benefit from it. So that's an efficient use of resources. People who are willing to pay, that their time is expensive, get the shortcut of using the road. And the others use public transportation. Of course, once you implement congestion charges, buses could go faster. That's a huge, so it's almost a win-win. But you see how we're stuck in our old beliefs. Suppose we live in a country that, for some reason, the government just said, okay, bread is something we need to fully control. No one is allowed to produce bread. We produce bread and we give it for free to people because that's a basic need. So suppose the state of Israel now takes control over all the bakeries, and suppose miraculously they manage to produce the same amount of bread exactly. So the only change would be that now bread is for free. What will happen? Will there be a shortage of bread? Of course. Same amount produced today, but for free, there will be a shortage of bread. And people will start queuing for bread. Okay? And then I will say, look, I have a magic solution to the problem of queues for bread. Charge money for it. So, are you crazy? But that's exactly the same thing. But you're just... Yeah, the right for bread. Okay. We have time to talk about that. That's a completely different topic. There's a chapter in the podcast called הרפורמה שעברה מתחת הרדאר, the reform that went unnoticed. So the Ministry of Finance, the Treasury, made a huge reform. Well, not huge, but I think the implications are huge, and it went, generally speaking, unnoticed. So once you start working, you have a job, then you're forced to put money, your employer and yourself forced to put money in a pension fund. And 1/3 of the money went to איגרות חוב מיועדות. So government bonds that you're forced to buy with 1/3 of the money, these government bonds of the state of Israel, that guarantee a real return, okay, תשואה ריאלית בתיקון אינפלציה, a real return of 4.85%. Okay, this was the situation until recently. And at the time, 2 or 3 years ago, the real interest rate in the market was 0. So the government, the officials in the Ministry of Finance said, that's horrible. That's just an extremely stupid, inefficient, unjust way to subsidize people who save for their pension. Why is that? Because it forces us to borrow money at a very expensive interest rate, a very high interest rate. And in a way, you know, maybe it's better that people, instead of just getting these bonds, they put the money in the stock market and on average make more than 4.85%. So they came up with the following suggestion, which was implemented. And it goes like that. now the fund invests all the money in however they do it, split it, whatever they do with all the money. Split it between indices, bonds, specific stock, bonds, etc. But on 1/3 of everything you own, you save, the return is guaranteed. And they raised it to 5.15. The return is guaranteed. What does it mean? If your money makes more, you don't get it. If your money makes less, the government subsidizes it. Okay? Guaranteed. The logic behind it is that it's true that the markets go up and down, but on average, because you repeat the same investment again and again, the risk goes down, and in the long run, you cannot lose in the stock market. This was the claim, okay, which is wrong, but let's see why. Actually, the day before yesterday, Josh and I mentioned this paper by Paul Samuelson, who in 1963 addresses, let me ask you, suppose I offer you the following game. Put 1,000 shekels on the table, toss a coin, okay? If it comes out heads, you get back the 1,000 shekels, plus I give you 1,100, okay? But if it's tails, you lose the 1,000. Okay, you see the bet? With 50%, you lose 1,000 shekels. With 50%, you gain 1,100. Who would take the bet? Who would take the bet? There's no right answer here. It's a matter of taste. Okay, guys, you're very risk-loving, but that which makes actually full sense. Suppose I increase it now to, you toss a coin, you lose 100,000 shekels or gain 110,000 shekels. Who would take the bet? Less, right? Less. Okay. Now, suppose I tell you, okay, you're hesitating to take the one-time bet because you might lose 100,000 shekels with 50%. True that you gain more, but still, you're risking a lot here. Here's my offer. Are you willing to do the same thing 100 times? Okay, 100 times. Toss a coin, independent. Every time you toss a coin, you could lose 100 or gain 110. Who is willing to do it 100 times? Okay. And what Paul Samuelson shows that you're inconsistent. Okay, that's wrong. So you're irrational in the sense that you're inconsistent. If you don't want to do it once, you don't want to do it 100 times. Your concept of the risks are wrong. So it's true that the probability you lose money goes very low. But you might lose a lot of money. And the way Samuelson proves this is the following. It's very simple and elegant. Okay, suppose we agreed on the 100 times. So you're not willing to do it once, and you're not willing, but you are willing to do it 100 times. And then suppose that even if you had much more money, you're still not willing to do it once, but you're willing to do it 100 times. No, same thing. Let's keep it simple. So again, those of you are not willing to pay 1,000 or gain 1,100, okay? Those of you are not willing to do this once, but are willing to do it 100 times. So let's do it 100 times. Now you just did the 99th time, and I tell you, what about the 100th time? I'm allowing you not to do the last one. Then you say, no, I don't want to do it because I don't want to do it once, okay? So you see, this way, we could go all the way down to 0. That's why I said in the beginning, as long as you prefer not to do once, even if you already made more money because you gambled a lot of time. So that's, you want to disagree with Samuelson?
I want to disagree with the utility function that you described, but it's not okay, no? Okay.
There's no utility function here. All there is consistent preferences. No, you don't need the utility.
May I comment, or like you want to rush?
Let's not go. It's technical details, which I think maybe I'll just stop here and open it to general questions. So yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
My utility from losing 100,000 shekels, it's way severe than if I don't like me as a person now. But if I am a millionaire, my utility from that is way lesser. Like, let's say my utility.
Yeah. Look, I take your point. That's why I said from the start, and Samuelson emphasizes that in his article, that within the range of money that you could even make with a few successful gambles, if you still in that range don't want to do it once, and you are willing to do it 100 times, you're irrational, you're inconsistent. That's all. It's covered. What you're saying is covered, but let's not go into it's a technical debate. Let's leave it. It's a beautiful article. You'll enjoy reading the introduction because it's not the way we write papers today. He actually tells a story about sitting with a colleague of him who is a very famous guy. He writes it beautifully, but his math skills are not that great. And that's how he motivates. Now, but let's go to it. Let me just finish with the problem here. What they're trying to do is alchemistry. To make something from nothing, it doesn't work because the treasury ignores the risk involved in this move. And the risk is huge because if the country of Israel goes into a recession and the world goes into a recession, in a recession, as you know, you need to spend more money than tax revenue. And in addition to that, they will need to save the savers. That could be a disaster to the Israeli economy. So they just, based on wrong ideas, supported by some weak economists, exactly the ones Samuelson criticized, they did this huge thing, which is just terrible. It's the right thing to cancel the bonds, that האיגרות חוב מיועדות היו צריכים לבטל, אבל לא להחליף אותם במשהו הרבה יותר גרוע. All right. One or two questions? One more question. Yeah.
So you discussed beforehand the Mimadim Limudim.
Yeah.
And in a few of the classes we've had so far, we discussed the issue of Haredim and how they don't contribute to the economy the same way due to lack of education in specific fields that can generate a large income. So isn't it one argument they can make that Mimadim Limudim encourages people to go down the direction of an academic path that could therefore increase their income in the future and contributing in the long run?
Yeah, but that argument, if this is valid, then why do you need to discriminate between people who from Madim or just other people? If you're saying there's a rationale to encourage people to go to university, encourage people to go to university. How is that related to your military service? I'll take one more question because always boys that ask the question.
What do you think about using apartments for Airbnb?
Oh, wow. I was hoping no one would ask that. It's a tough one. So the idea is that yes. The problem, some people argue, is that rents in Israel, especially in the center, are very high because instead of renting flat to people who want to live in them, people rent it out through Airbnb or they just use it as hotels, and that increases rents. But I mean, you could extend the same argument and say, don't build hotels in Israel. You build instead flats. Why do you need hotels? So I don't see the difference here. So you see, I don't have a better answer than that. And here I must admit that ideologically, I'm in favor of freedom. So plus, when we go to other places, we like to have a place to be a tourist and to rent. So I'm not a fan of this restriction. All right, thank you very much.